Good evening, everyone. Hope y'all are doing okay out there. It is Saturday, June 7th, and we have a very exciting Promethean Action discussion for you tonight. I'm Keisha Rogers, and I'm going to be joined by Brian Lance, who is going to do round two of the momentum that is underway under President Trump. I like that. Um, and I just want to say so tonight's discussion is going to be on President Trump's initiative of restoring a gold standard in science, unleashing an age of discovery, the golden age. And you hear the president continuing to talk about a golden age. So I'm going to ask you now to turn off all the noise because this is going to be a different type of discussion. So we're not talking about tonight what team are you on? What is the red meat that's being thrown around? What is going on with all of the mayhem? We are going to be talking about the power of human creativity, what President Trump has unleashed with his commitment to a gold standard in science, what we're going to be doing coming up in the 250th anniversary, which is happening next year, 2026, already preparing for a new golden era of scientific and technological progress. And our movement organization is named for the fire bringer, Prometheus. And this is Promethean pack here. And so, what does that mean? Unleashing creativity, unleashing fire. And this truly means unleashing the God given potential that is the spark of all of us, of all babies born, human beings that differs us from the animals. And so I'm excited to introduce Brian tonight to go through a couple of these executive orders. President Trump has initiated numerous executive orders. And a lot of what people know is we have to defend our borders, we have to rebuild our manufacturing, our industries, and we've talked about that in these discussions. But the executive orders on advancing science and technology, advancing energy, nuclear power is going to be key to expanding mankind's scope throughout the universe and the solar system. And so with that, I want to invite Brian to come on and lead us in this discussion, and we'll just have a back and forth dialogue throughout. So let me bring Brian on.
Well, thank you, Keisha. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's the gold standard in science, and President Trump's four accompanying executive orders, five executive orders in total. And we want to start tonight discussing part of what has come between people and science as a subject. And it's very important, I think, to bring it up at this point because Trump is opening up the windows, throwing open the shutters. He wants to let light and air in. And people have been under an onslaught, a counterculture onslaught, the guts stripped out of education. Truly pagan institutions have been unleashed. And people, in their response, it's not that everybody's been drawn into this or that or whatever, but it's people have gotten under it. They've turned inward in many cases. And I think it's affected families and children, of course. And I think it's important that we think about that. Maybe it's not you, it's your neighbor, or as Theo Von likes to say, I'm your second cousin. Maybe it's like your second cousin. But people around you certainly have suffered from this. without even being aware of it. When in fact, if we're talking about the universe. We're talking about a created universe, created by God, an ongoing creation. Whatever your religion, within the Abrahamic religions, this outlook is shared there, and it's powerful insight by man from early on that man is distinct from the animals, and so it's really unnatural to view science as somehow foreign or almost like a stranger. Who is that stranger? To be wary. Instead, we want to change that. And of course, we have the capability as human beings to change because we can reflect. We can reflect on how we think, what are the assumptions we're making, where we might have made a mistake, not just in a fact, but in how we think, and willfully change it. That's a capacity that we have, and that your neighbor has, and your second cousin. Adam Sturman, our webmaster on Promethean action, said it very clearly. I think he said this. He said as well. Let's be clear. The more news media you consume, the less likely you are to take actual effective political action. This isn't an accident, he goes on. The oligarchy's media machine is designed to keep you paralyzed, angry, and passive. The red meat that Keisha was referring to, they're throwing out red meat all the time. They want you scrolling, clicking, and consuming, not organizing, building, acting. That's a article that's last I saw, third or fourth down on the Promethean Action website, and it starts with an announcement that one of our most recent short videos done 3 times a week. I think it was one by Barbara Boyd. Had been viewed by that point by 250,000 people. Now I think it's up to close to 400,000. But he thanks our supporters rightfully, but then goes on to address this passivity and point in the direction of a solution, which is us. We're here to help you. So I think then that beyond the day-to-day work of keeping a family clothed and fed, many of our grandparents, our parents, and children have really gotten cut off from this excitement of discovery and the profound beauty of God's ongoing creation. And our role, which is to be Promethean, to be Prometheans, to be firebringers, to be co-participants in God's creation. We're going to be discussing Trump's restoring of a gold standard in science. And this will have something to say about that, I think, when you actually are kind of brought, your attention is brought to it. But I want to, at this point, bring up the slide of Psalms 8. Psalms, of course, songs. And this is a song of David, of course. And let's just briefly read it. O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is thy name in all the earth, who has set thy glory above the heavens. Think of scientific discovery. Think of exploration of all kinds. Out of the mouth of babes and sucklings hast thou ordained strength because of thine enemies, that thou mightest still the enemy and the avenger. When I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars, which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him? And the Son of Man that thou visitest him? For thou hast made him a little lower than the angels, and hath crowned him with glory and honor. That madest him to have dominion over the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, yea, and the beasts of the field, the fowl of the air, and the fish of the sea, and whatsoever passeth through the paths of the sea. O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is thy name in all the earth. And I think that captures right there the work of those fingers, our dominion over the work of his hands, captures how we should be really thinking about today, where we are, and what we can create and discover. So you might have some thoughts, Keisha. Jump in if you do. I think we've certainly got a scientific awakening. I want to turn to nuclear energy to just underscore this. This is the subject of the 4 executive orders that President Trump released on May 23rd, and he released it alongside a separate executive order, Restoring Gold Standard Science, which I'm going to come back to. Now, this grew out of the declaration of a national economic emergency, which he declared on January 20th. Many of you will recall that. And that sets the stage for this process. Here's the White House release on the announcement of those executive orders, those 5 total executive orders. Already, following January 20th, and really beginning to explode out of the gate with Trump's second election victory. The second administration, even before it took office, already in the private sector, state level, the government and so forth, there were already all kinds of initiatives being unleashed, which are going to be very important to every American family, to our security, to our economic well-being. And I want to just mention, the latest figures show already growth at a 5% growth rate already. That's what we're headed towards for the year. We cut the trade deficit in half in April, or rather in March. It was announced in April. Inflation is way down. You're already seeing consequences of the growth of actual wealth, of wealth production, making changes on nature for man, our intended role as a co-creator. So we have small modular reactors, nuclear reactors. You probably have heard this, but these are projects now underway in Wyoming, Idaho, Michigan, Tennessee, Texas. I'm sure there are others. I'm missing others. Tennessee, you've got Kairos Power there at Oak Ridge National Labs, on the land of National Labs there. You've got the BWRX 300 with General Electric. That's on TVA federal land. Fusion Energy, Project Infinity. This involves the TVA, Type 1 Energy, the company, and the Department of Energy's Oak Ridge National Laboratory. In Michigan, you have the 800 megawatt Palisades plant, and Hotech is also going to build some small modular reactors on that plant as well to virtually double its capacity. In Texas, we just passed House Bill 14, which creates the Texas Advanced Nuclear Energy Office, a workforce development program on nuclear energy, and the Texas Advanced Nuclear Development Fund and the Completion Grant Program. So this is meshing. These projects, state, federal, are meshing together as a combination that's coming, as I said, out of the gate. And then you have the president's latest four executive orders. I'll just mention a couple of highlights from them. They're well worth actually studying. The first one is reinvigorating the nuclear industrial base. Obviously, to build nuclear power plants at scale, you have to have an actual industrial base of a workforce, of academic capability as well in terms of engineering and research. All of that, a supply chain of that can produce the components, so they're delivered on time. The plants are built. The modular components are built from even smaller components. So these are elements in the reinvigorating the nuclear industrial base. But it goes, executive order, but it goes on to very specifically 5 gigawatts of uprates of existing nuclear power plants will be done. This is the order coming from the president. It's not just words, it's an order. Uprates are where you increase the power output of existing power plants. 5 gigawatts, that's the equivalent of building 5 nuclear power plants. Upgrades to current reactors. Then we are going to build, he is ordering this, the president, we are going to build 10 large nuclear reactors with complete designs that will be under construction by 2030. 10 large nuclear power plants. There's the loan office program of the Department of Energy will be mobilized for this purpose. There will be the restarting of closed nuclear power plants. There will be completing construction of existing nuclear reactors that were prematurely suspended. For example, in South Carolina, which the utility down there wants to do. That's an AP1000, a reactor plant. A key component, and this actually goes back, this ties directly back into the introductory comments that I made to this presentation, is that the report addresses the fuel cycle, the nuclear fuel cycle, so-called nuclear waste. You've heard all about it. And of course, this is one of these pessimistic incantations that people have been dumbed down with. What do you do with the nuclear waste? What do you do with the nuclear waste? And I'll just read here briefly a recommended national policy to support the management of spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste and the development and deployment of advanced fuel cycle capabilities to establish a safe, secure, and sustainable long-term fuel cycle. We are going to recycle nuclear waste. Now, this is extremely important, but before I get to that, just 2 other items. The Department of Defense shall commence and have completed no later than September 30th, 2028, a nuclear power plant on a U.S. military installation. The Department of Energy will, within 30 months of the date of this order, have an operating advanced nuclear power plant on federal land. These are additional orders from the president, directives, which of course all will involve private companies, corporations, labor. This will be the building out of really a national nuclear platform. But let me focus on this question of reprocessing nuclear fuel. This may seem somewhat boring to some people or obscure, but put up the next slide, if you will, Keisha. Thank you. Americans have been dumbed down, as I said, for generations now, that there's nothing that can be done with the nuclear waste except it burying it somewhere. Well, we're putting up here a photograph of the Orano La Hague facility reprocessing plant in France, in La Hague, or La Hague, if you will. This has been operating since the 1960s. Europe has been recycling its nuclear fuel, particularly France, which is largely utilizes nuclear power as its source of generating electricity, has entirely been recycling its nuclear waste since the 1960s, while Americans were being treated to this myth that there was no solution. And so finally, I'm bringing this up. I mean, it's sad in itself that happened. But on the other hand, finally, there's daylight. Finally, as I said, the shutters are thrown open. Sunlight is being let in. We are going to not only do what they're doing, that Orano is doing, in conjunction with the French government, in terms of that is taking nuclear waste, processing it, and then remanufacturing it as nuclear fuel. Less than 5% of the energy well, I'll just quote you from Jess Gahan at the Idaho National Laboratory. The energy in the nuclear waste of the United States to power the entire country for 100 years with clean energy. And there's been a response to him saying no for 500 years. But the point is, and he goes on to say, the technology to turn nuclear waste into energy, known as nuclear fast reactors, has existed for decades. It was proven out in the United States government's own lab pilot plant that operated from the 1960s to the 1990s. And if you flip to the next slide, that's the control room of that facility that operated at the Idaho National Laboratories. Anyway, it's the next slide when we can get it up. I'm just going to continue here. So that's part of what's in the executive orders. This is, we're going to transform the entire area of nuclear energy utilization for the production of energy, and we're going to upgrade to fast reactors that themselves have the capacity to recycle so-called spent fuel or so-called nuclear waste, which was never waste. It was never waste. So the air is being cleared on that, but more than that, we're getting to work. There's the control room of the EB3-2 breeder reactor at Idaho National Lab. So that brings me back to the subject of restoring gold standard science. And I want to start with the opening a quote of that executive order from the president, signed May 23rd. And you can put up that slide. And it reads, over the last 5 years, confidence that science acts in the best interests of the public has fallen significantly, which is certainly an understatement. That's the title of it, and you can go to the next slide, Keisha. That's the cover of the, there we are. The last was the cover of the executive order. Over the last 5 years, confidence that scientists act in the best interest of the public has fallen significantly. A majority of researchers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics believe science is facing a reproducibility crisis. The falsification of data by leading researchers has led to high-profile retractions of federally funded research. Unfortunately, the federal government has contributed to this loss of trust. In several notable cases, executive departments and agencies have used or promoted scientific information in a highly misleading manner. Now, this is incredibly important. This is not simply about woke policies or DEI, or even simply what generally comes under the rubric of green or global warming or zero carbon kind of ideologies. That's part of the problem. That's part of what the president's identifying it. But it is much broader. There's a 2016 study, so a little less than 10 years ago, by Nature, the scientific publication. That poll of researchers, scientists, the very people that President Trump is referring to in this executive order, were asked about their trust in what was published in scientific journals and available as research papers. They found that over 70% of researchers had difficulty replicating the studies published by others, that is, those that made it into the journals, with 52% believing there was a significant reproducibility crisis. That is, that what the study purported to show could not be or was very difficult to reproduce. And you may have heard Robert Kennedy Jr. refer to this in recent comments as well. Now, this was 2016. This was long before COVID. This is not about vaccines or all of that unfolded in the midst of COVID and the aftermath. The loss of credibility as regards policy around the COVID pandemic. And I think it's important to think about what the impact of this has been on the man on the street. He was confused, and some of the confusion may have been his fault, but it was also confusion multiplied by what has been an unraveling of basic scientific research in this nation with implications for the world. And I'm not saying the problem is limited to here, but here are some of the aspects that are pointed out in this problem. And this is why a restoration of a gold standard in science is so important, not just for scientists and researchers, but for the American public, so that they're able to access and understand what the hell is going on or should be going on, or what is being discovered and what is just malarkey. First, publication bias. There's a tendency to publish positive results, even if they're not statistically significant, while negative or inconclusive results are less likely to be published. Well, think about it. Inconclusive results are just as important as conclusive results, in pointing a finger at a problem, an area of dissonance in the work that has to be explored. This is an area for exploration and further discovery, whether it's published in a journal or not. That's these works are important. Many studies may not have enough participants or be designed to detect real effects, leading to misleading conclusions. I mean, who do you have in the room? It's like, who are you polling to get a poll that says Trump is going to lose Iowa by, 20% and so forth? People remember that fraud. So these are just going on here. Questionable research practices. Some researchers may engage in practices that can influence results, such as data manipulation or cherry picking. Inadequate reporting, studies. This is acknowledged by scientists. This is not Trump speaking. I mean, Trump's summarizing this in his executive order that he's addressing. But this problem has been known since at least 2005, when the first actual thorough investigations of this problem were published. 2005, acknowledged in the scientific community, not to the public, but acknowledged. Inadequate reporting. Studies often do not include enough detail about methods or experimental conditions for others to replicate the work. Think about this in terms of, any area you want to talk about. And this reached such a peak of recognition even 8 years ago or so, that the big pharma was up in arms, that they were investing money, their money or other people's money, based on studies that were inadequate, and that they could not even determine their veracity because the methods utilized, the computer models, the programs, were not published. This was considered the private area of material held by the researcher himself. Just to give you an example of this, I don't want to belabor this. I think I've made the point for our purposes here, that the president of Stanford University in 2023 was forced to resign. A neuroscientist. He's a neuroscientist, professor at Stanford University, still is a professor. He was forced to resign as president of Stanford University because 12 of his papers showed not only inadequacies, but showed a manipulation of data, of imaging, and so on and so forth. It was found that he was not personally responsible for, fraudulent behavior, but he had not overseen the studies that he was overseeing with others, right? That he was responsible for adequately, and was forced to resign. This was only discovered, in terms of publicly discovered, by a student newspaper journalist who got wind of this and investigated and published a series of articles in the student newspaper there at Stanford University. But that's how bad the problem has become. And again, I want to emphasize this is being addressed by the president. When he says a gold standard in science, this is not hooey. This is not just a politically charged attempt to get back at the enemies of the Republican Party or the left or whatever. This is acknowledged as a problem within the scientific community itself. Just to give an example people may be more familiar with, if you take the limits to growth study done by Forrester and Meadows back, now it's been something like 25 years ago or more. But if you take that study, it was done with a computer model, the so-called world tree model with 5 interacting variables. It simply held certain axioms constant, which is that resources were fixed, that the production of food and industrial growth and population would be otherwise exponential, and therefore with limited resources, there would be a population and industrial crisis, collapse. Limits to Growth, sponsored by the Club of Rome. MIT, a group of MIT-led scientists came out with that study, and that was along with Paul Ehrlich's population bomb. He was at Stanford University. These are the kinds of linear systems analysis studies that in the area of projections of policy and so forth. This is what the Congressional Budget Office is guilty of as well. These kind of extrapolations simply from existing facts, but without revealing the axioms, the programs, the algorithms, and what the implications are. So that's a little bit more on that. But again, this is known as the reproducibility crisis. So just to make clear, just to take some examples from chemistry, this is in the hard sciences. This is not limited to the biosciences. It's not limited to social sciences, although it's definitely there. The Forest and Meadow study is an example of that. It's also Milton Friedman's economic modeling. That's what he was known for, is econometrics, in terms of his specialty in economics itself. It was these computer models counting money, simply simplifying the economy down to counting dollars, as if all you do is extrapolations based on counting dollars and the supply of dollars, whether it grows or shrinks and so on and so forth, you can account for the actual real economy, the functioning physical economy that's making physical changes on nature for man. It's impossible. It couldn't be done. It can't be done. But this extends to the hard sciences, chemistry, methodological variability, even slight variations in experimental design and methodologies. I'm reading from a chemistry journal on this, such as reactant purity, temperature control, or environmental conditions can significantly impact the replication process of chemistry. The integrity of chemical experiments relies heavily on the quality and consistency of the reagents. That's the substances introduced to facilitate a reaction, or to measure whether that such a reaction or a reaction has occurred. Reagents. The integrity of chemical experiments relies heavily on the quality and consistency of the reagents used, right? Sourcing of chemical of chemicals is critical, and the question of degradation of chemicals enters in. You can imagine, in the rush to publish or perish. This is a driving force beyond a social bias or just simply bot science, where the outcome is generated as a result of the money that the researcher receives from outside sources, foundations, etc. George Soros, that sort of thing. Specialized and advanced equipment may not be available, and therefore replicatability cannot be done or actually thoroughly tested or adequately tested. So the original results remain unconfirmed, and so on and so forth. Different methods of data analysis can lead to varying interpretations. We hear this again and again. Publish or perish. If you can get your article into a journal before the other guy, then you're first in line or closer to the top of the line to get additional funding to do more research. So the rush to publish, to look past certain ambiguities, to avoid closer examination, which would mean more time, more resources, more effort, enters into the picture. So all of this occurs, and it occurs in the life sciences, as I think is obvious, at least for our purposes. So the Trump is opening the window on this, opening the door. We're going to get back to a gold standard in science again, and that's going to be important for everybody. It's going to open up the scientific community. Is opening up the scientific community itself for greater discussion and deliberation in the work going forward. And this is being incorporated under the executive order into the federal government, into the Health and Human Services, into the Department of Energy, of Interior, of Transportation. And Department of Transportation is having to throw out a lot of gobbledygook that's held up projects up and down the line, infrastructure projects, and so forth. So this is going to be systematically worked through in terms of federal agencies going forward. So I want to turn then from nuclear energy, where I left off briefly, quickly to space exploration. Just naming a couple of examples here quickly. In space manufacturing, super alloy casting, super alloys. These alloys are a mix that can't be done under the pull of gravity. You have the growing of human tissue. As it says, gravity's a downer when trying to grow tissue. To grow tissue walls, think of that. The force of gravity prevents it on Earth, but in space or extremely low gravity, cells can be built without supports, without platforms. Those platforms themselves can become infected and have their own negative consequences and so forth. So we're moving in the direction of being able to produce organs in space. And the ISS, the International Space Station, has the Redwire 3D biofabrication facility. We're 3D printing human tissue, which is going to potentially allow us to solve the problem of organ shortages in operations here on Earth, transplants and so forth. Then there's manufacturing in outer space. If you will go to the next slide. I mean, this is think about trying to manufacture in outer space. I mean, truly outer space. The last slide there. Go back one. There you go. If you're in, think of we can think of 6 degrees of freedom in space, and this just briefly shows those. The 3 translational, up and down, left and right. And 3 rotational, known as pitch and yaw and roll. All right. Well, if there's no gravity, obviously the item that you're working on and the astronaut, or if it's a robot that's working on on material, on a machine or a satellite or whatever, each is subject to movement in 6 directions, right? And not just 6 individual directions, but combined directions. So this is just important to understand that when we're talking, you might hear the terminology about manufacturing in outer space itself, not just in space manufacturing that refers to the ISS, but in actual outer space manufacturing, this becomes incredibly important. You have, the problem maintaining position, of chip control, that is you're chipping off parts like with a machine tool, chipping off parts, or a robotic instrument is chipping off chips. When those chips float, right? They can go in all kinds of, they can screw up the machinery, right? They get in the way. All of these are incredibly important, and therefore you require specialized containment systems to deal with the latter. And so you have an example of what's going on with NASA right now is the automated reconfigurable mission adaptive digital assembly systems, ARMADAs. The next slide. These are robotic machines to build large structures in space. This is being built at the NASA facility there in Silicon Valley. This is one of the machines. As you can see, it's carrying a soccer-sized ball called a Vorex. And you can maybe make out that it's a cuboctahedron. And then the next slide, it shows this. There's another machine in the back there as well that just is actually attaching these vortexes, Voexes together. But here's the construction of this. And then next, we're going to show a short, very short. Hopefully, you'll be able to see this. This is a short 11-second time-lapse video of this construction process there in the laboratory. This is the kind of in-space manufacturing that's going to bleed over in terms of its importance into the Golden Dome project for space defense. If we can't get it up, I'll go ahead here. So, and of course, then you have, and it's the next slide, 3D printing, including of regolith on the moon itself to build moon bases. The same kind of 3D printing technology used otherwise in printing, quote unquote, printing cellular structures. Here we go with the short 11-second video. And there we are. A set of machines building that up. All right. That's our video for the presentation. And then in terms of work in space science, I want to mention hypersonic flight, just briefly. Mach 5 or higher, 5 times the speed of sound or higher. You now have a number of companies working on hypersonic flight. Venus Aerospace here in Houston, Texas, where I am. Prometheus has its Quarterbacks Mk1 hypersonic test aircraft that's now been tested. And this goes back to NASA's HyperX program back at in the early 2000s, late 1990s and 2000s. Stratolaunch is another company. There's a picture of 3D printing, layer upon layer, building up moon-based structures. So turning now quickly to the Golden Dome in terms of these frontiers of science that President Trump has unleashed. We've talked about it before. The material is available on my Substack. I've done a series on this. But the whole Golden Dome itself is a harbinger, really, of potentially a new defense industry. The Space Force, the Space Defense Agency, and so on. This is the Space Development Agency, the Missile Defense Agency. These agencies, the three shown there in the shield. And on the left, you see the 3 layers of the layered defense system that is now being built out. On the outer orbits, you already have existing the space-based infrared systems. That's the SBIRs, CBIRS, in high orbit, high elliptical orbit, or geosynchronous orbit. Those exist and they're being upgraded with the OPIR system, the overhead persistent rate infrared, which is a more advanced system. And below that, in middle Earth orbit, that's where you're going to have the HBTSS. That's not mentioned there, but that's the hypersonic and ballistic tracking missile sensor. Incredibly important. That's what's going to deliver tracking information, fire control to the ground station. for interceptors, whether space-based or land-based. And then you have the low Earth orbit satellites, very much modeled on the SpaceX Starlink system, which will provide tracking, broad tracking, warning and tracking for the system. Now, there's different capacities in each of these. The ones farthest out, that's the early warning system that we've known for decades. It watches the whole Earth. Middle Earth orbit, less so. And low Earth orbit, well, that's pinpoint really a small area, because remember, each of these satellites, particularly in low Earth orbit, is moving at thousands of miles an hour. So it's over an area, but very briefly. And then it has to pass its information on to another satellite in the same orbit, transfer that data so that there's a continuity of data in tracking the launch of hypersonic missiles or ballistic missiles. The Golden Dome initiative, launched by President Trump February 20th, and then just more recently elaborated as an initial $175 billion project, is aiming at building out this entire system. Portions of it already exist. It's been being built out since Trump's first administration, continuing under the Avatar's administration of the Autopilot. It continued even then, but it's being built out and will be built out very rapidly now with Trump's policies going forward, assuming those policies do go forward. And that's up to us doing what Adam Sturman talked about in terms of doing the organizing and the building. If you will, well, let me just move on from this. You can keep that up or you can take it down. But in terms of the science involved, well, yes, one here, let's turn to this, lasers. Now, lasers are used right now. They're used in space. They're used, we measure the moon, the terrain of the moon. We bounce data from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter down to retroreflectors on the moon's surface, and the time that it takes from there to be shot down and bounce back at the speed of light gives you a measurement of distance very accurately. We use laser ranging to measure Earth-Moon distance, sending laser pulses, and so on. The Chinese have just achieved a satellite laser ranging of the Earth-Moon surface space in daytime. For the first time that's been done. But that's all just measuring, as I said, measuring a time between when a pulse of light is sent and when it returns. But laser communications is actually the communication of data, which is achieved by modulating the intensity and the frequency of the data and of the flow of the data. And a little bit like Morse code, if you will. So this transmission has just been achieved just this last year with in January of this year, January 2025, between a York Space Systems satellite and a SpaceX missile tracking platform in different orbits, both of them in low Earth orbit, but in different orbits. They were able to communicate data. This slide here shows a sensor gathering data, maybe tracking a hypersonic missile, a glide hypersonic. It may be picking up data on that. It's gathering that, and then it's shooting that data perhaps over to a transport platform, or in this case, a missile tracking platform, which then is successfully relayed that data back to Earth. That was accomplished in January 2025. Laser communications are going to have dramatic uses in any number of areas. The communications are much faster. Their speed of light much faster than radio waves. And if you're going to stop a hypersonic missile moving at Mach 5, headed for the United States, for example, or anywhere else in the world, if you want to take it out, you've got to gather your data. You've got to get it to the station and deploy those intercepts in a matter of seconds or fractions of seconds. That's what laser communications allows you to do, with a higher data rate, lower latency, and also increased bandwidth. The other I just want to mention briefly,
And
which
it
is
uses
very
infrared light. It's
I'm sorry,
communications. It uses infrared
what uses
laser
Oh,
communication.
laser? It's using a laser generated light, photons,
Yes.
as opposed to infrared, and it's much faster. Therefore, in terms of communicating, infrared is used to pick up data. We're talking about here in terms of means of communicating data, radio waves being replaced by lasers, photon transmission at the speed of light. Related to this is the sensors, these extremely sensitive sensors that have now been developed, that are being used in all kinds of areas of the economy. But in particular now is the importance is the development of neuromorphic sensors that imitate how the human sensing of the eye works, for example. Neuromorphic sensors, which have been developed in the last 20 years, will allow for the picking up of important data out of the flood of data coming in otherwise, and allowing for its rapid transmission. The sensing of the nervous system occurs for ourselves, and something like it's similar with animals, of course, on a lower level, occurs through the change that occurs that's associated with a sense stimulus, including over time. In other words, there's the background, but that's taken for granted. It's when you see a change in what you see that you are alerted, that you take notice. It is an anomaly. And then, of course, your mind goes to work on that to create a gestalt, of what is occurring, a hypothesis, and gestalt of what is actually occurring. These neuromorphic sensors do something similar. They're dumb, but they basically pick up the background, but then set that aside between the sensors themselves and the processors, computer processors, set that aside, and they don't transmit data on that. They only transmit data when they see something new that pops out. As in the infrared, like you were saying, Keisha, they pick up, for example, the launch of a missile, or it could be utilized in autonomous vehicles for similar purposes, for avoidance of obstructions and so on and so forth. But in this case, to pick up hypersonic missile launches, for example, early on in the early stages, and then communicate just that data, which is a much smaller amount of data, a small bundle of data, then can be transmitted via laser communications to ground control. So the neuromorphic sensors are a new development, critically important development, an analog tool that works in an analog form as opposed to a digital form that actually speeds up communications and data transfer. So those are areas of just some of the areas within the Golden Dome overall. Hypersonics themselves, laser communications, neuromorphic sensors, some of the areas they're going to have a multitude of applications. So really, all of this is opening up a new vista. But most importantly, I think, is the gold standard in science. The gold standard being reestablished in the United States, letting in fresh air, whether it's in the field of physical economy, as we're involved in, or in the hard sciences, so-called hard sciences, physics, chemistry, biosciences, so forth. This is going to have an incredible effects. We're entering a new frontier in space exploration, in medical science. We are created to do this. We are meant to have dominion. We are meant to be Promethean. Let's go to work.